horrifying.
Shock, shock, disbelief.
Stunned, I guess, stunned.
Confusion.
It was like a nuclear bomb went off. It was something I never saw before.
Oh, it was just sheer chaos, just madness. It was people running down the West Side Highway, like on bicycles. And there were just crazy people, and there were news reporters that were running towards the opposite direction.
The whole idea that there could be people who would get into a plane and turn it into a weapon and just kill people, it was like no place to put it in your brain. And it was so that profound sense of shock and disbelief, is this really happening? So I think that was the first thing I felt.
I wasn't angry at first. It was just almost like tunnel vision, where everything now, focuses down and you only have one concept in your mind. So I guess it would be stunned. I did not react angrily at first. I wasn't upset at first. I just was sort of like emotionless and completely shocked by the event that occurred. It just never occurred to me in a million years that something like that could happen in the United States. We've never had anything like that before.
Confusion, because from watching the television, it didn't, until about a good 10 minutes after that, you didn't know that it was, I didn't know if it was an accident, and then I had didn't even cross my mind that it was intentional. Well, what happened was that morning on September 11th, my husband Matthew called me at about 10 to 9, which is when the first plane struck the tower, and they didn't know what happened. And he asked me on the phone, he said, there was a big explosion, there's smoke everywhere, what happened? And I just put the phone down, and I went over to the TV, and I was looking at the TV, and you couldn't, at that moment, you couldn't decipher whether, it looked like, my first reaction was that, well, what's the matter with the air traffic controllers? Didn't they see those buildings? So I completely thought it was an accident. When I went back to the phone, he was not on the phone. So I did try to call him back, and there was no answer.
Just the idea that something like this could happen. A person goes to work in the morning and they never see them after that.
He worked at Cantor Fitzgerald on the 104th floor in the North Tower, which is the tower that used to have the TV antenna on it. So I figured he was trying to get out. So I was it was like, okay, he's not at his desk, he's trying to get out. And that was a good feeling. But I saw, from looking at the TV, I saw where the plane had hit. And the second thought in my mind was, they're not going to get past there.
My mom was out for a jog, and she came to the school to pick me up. And we walked outside, and I looked up, and I saw huge pillars of smoke, just solid black clouds coming up from the Trade Center. It was just fire, and it was just like, it was shocking, really. I was in 5th grade, and I had a comprehension for stuff like this, but I didn't really have an experience. I didn't experience it at all. I mean, no one should really ever have to experience this stuff, but I mean, I unfortunately did at such a young age.
It was a complete shock to everybody when the buildings actually collapsed. One other issue was the fact that one of my students, senior in one of my history classes, had a dad in one of the buildings. And unfortunately, he was actually on the 102nd floor, and so he died. He died. He was above the impact point, and so he did not survive. At first, everybody felt good to be there. You wanted to be there to take part and try to find guys. At first, we thought that we were going to find living members, and everybody wanted to get in and do their part and dig. And as time went on, we realized that there was less and less a chance of finding any survivors. And it was tough. We basically were just pulling out body parts, and and that was it.
They discovered him, they found his body, he went to the morgue, and he was what you would say intact. okay? Which is not the case of many of my friends who lost their loved one, whether it was a husband or a wife. And then for the past 7 years, my friends have been being notified. So we were pretty lucky. And we had a mass for him the following Tuesday and buried him on a Tuesday. And he's in Homedale Cemetery. But he's still here in this house.
That was one of the hardest things we had to go through. And because we'd work in the pile all day long in our shifts and then come home at night, shower, and go to 3 or 4 wakes, and then time came funerals to follow. And a lot of times there weren't even any, and there wasn't anybody in the coffins, just, pieces of bodies and, fingers and, just anything they can identify this person with.
I didn't know anybody, I quite literally knew no one who was in the building. I didn't know anybody who was associated with the, any of the firemen or the policemen who lost their lives. I always got it from a secondhand perspective. Even in the case of my student, she was out for quite a long time, and when she came back, she never wanted to discuss it, and so even there it was always a secondhand relationship to it.
Children don't always, they find it much more difficult to grasp the idea of death itself. And that, what happens with that, this is why you have lingering effects with children who have lost their parents, for example. As they grow, and as they pass different milestones, they go into a different grade. Maybe a child is growing and he's going to start playing basketball for the first time. In that context, that loss reasserts itself at those times because they miss their father, let's say, not being there for their games. Maybe when they just think what it must mean when they graduate. So even though that could happen like 5 or 6 years later, the missing is pronounced at those special times.
I found myself being more careful around her in the types of things that I said. So where I might have said something that touched on death, or, well, for example, like the Nazis during World War II or something, I'll be much more careful about talking about the Holocaust in an environment in which she was in the classroom because I didn't want to trigger a response. Now, in some ways maybe that actually impacted the quality of the teaching, but at the same time you've got to acknowledge, a person's feelings.
My feelings are definitely different now than my emotions immediately following the text. Because anyone really, if after experiencing such a traumatizing event, that would feel differently. Like they would feel this standard shock. They go into denial, hyperventilation. You have all that stuff, and then you have, hatred. You have, like just sadness, really, and then. But now, looking back at it, the emotions are the same, but not as such degrees as they were when you initially experienced something. So.
Anger, yeah, anger all the time. You build a life with somebody, you have children, you buy homes, you change jobs. I had a business with my husband. I had to sell that business. And you go through your parents' illness, you bury your parents, it's like a lifetime went by, and I was with my husband for 20 years. We were married for 18, we were engaged or dated for 2 years, and I was with this person for 20 years. And, to just be snuffed out it's a hideous way to end a relationship. It's just so abrupt.
Yeah, I think my not understanding, but my approach to it matured. If you actually looked at this country immediately after the attack, you'd note that there were American flags every place. American flags on every car, American flags hanging from every house. There was a natural reaction that we had been attacked, and so there's this patriotic response. As time goes on, and at the time, if you'd put any of those guys in front of me, in front of a jury, I'm opposed to the death penalty, but I might have seriously considered voting for the death penalty just because everybody was so angry.
Now it's like a dream, and it's a little more relaxed. You know, we don't, of course, I'm not, you know, going to funerals and wakes, and like you said before, I do think about it, but it's like a fog, you know, and I guess in time everything fades out a little bit, which is good. And, you know, it's like a thing of the past.
There's a term where in literature where we talk about the loss of innocence. It goes back to the idea of Adam and Eve discovering their sin and being banished from the garden. Well, in a sense, that's what happened on 9/11. So many of us were banished from the garden. The garden being, well, this is how life is, and this is how it all fits together, this is what we do, and then that ends, and we find ourselves in this other world where now we know that death can occur unexpectedly, can occur as an act of violence.
I mean, I had a nice house in New York City. I mean, I had a lot of friends, and I had a lot of sports. I was playing sports. I mean, I was just a nice, ordinary kid, and I thought the world was perfect and everything was right in the world, and I never watched the news or anything, so I didn't know. And when I saw this, I was like, wow, I guess the world is not perfect. I mean, I can't explain it really more than that. That was my big wake-up call to reality.
Every day is difficult. Every day is still difficult. I get up myself. It's just right now, since my sons are away at college, it's just me and Francesca. The house is quiet. There's no noise here. They were home for Christmas. I still completely decorate my house for Christmas, and I do it by myself. And that's pretty much, I wouldn't say it's by choice, but every day is difficult, and it'll never ever be the same.
As you come back and look at it now with a little distance between the event and how we're trying to teach it now, you have to try to make it a more sophisticated analysis of what's actually going on.
Well, you know, to tell the truth, some of that shock still remains. It's hard to get your mind around this reality that there could be people who would do this to other people. I mean, certainly it's been done throughout the centuries. You know, people have treated others horribly, but this whole thing is just so difficult to embrace. And then with that comes, I think, a great deal of anger and just sadness that so many people have had to suffer so unnecessarily.
I haven't slept well since September 11th. I cannot sleep at night. If I wake up for an instant, things start racing through my mind about what I have to do the next day and what's going to happen in this. It's not a comforting thing, and that's a lot of the widows and widowers have the same problem. We just don't sleep.
Looking back at it, I'm personally going to come out and say right now, I support the war on terrorism 100% because of stuff like this. I don't want something like this ever happening again. So I really just want just world peace like everyone else wants. So
I have to say, recently I've kind of put it to pass. You know, it's, you know, now that I'm retired, I've recently retired, and I'm not around the fire department as much, and it's not there to remind me, but I do have one thing that reminds me of it, and I do look at the picture every day of all the guys that died that day. So I guess you could say sometimes, you know, not every day, but quite often I do see that picture, and it does remind me of it.
I guess the key thing here is defining what this incident is all about. Try to define what this incident is all about, why it took place, and then what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? You can come up with simplistic answers. It's probably a pretty complex issue, and I'm not sure that it's really been visited fully at this particular point in time.
I think it's important to pay attention to what has happened. I think interviews like this are helpful for people to to think about how fragile life can be, and to counteract, make a commitment to counteract the forces of evil by doing something good in their lives, by reaching out to other people, by helping them, by going out of their way to do something good for someone. That's, I think, in the end, how we defeat the forces of evil in the world, by doing good.
I think anybody's faith would get them through a tragedy such as this. Anybody. If you, any faith that you have, that's what gets you through. And then you realize how precious life is. Life is just so precious, and I try and teach my kids that. That's my biggest challenge, is raising my kids, but they help. And they're a constant reminder of him. Anthony looks like him, my son Matthew acts like him, Francesca's very stubborn, that's the Irish side. So I see my husband around, I see him, and he painted that room, so, he's around. I haven't done his clothes yet, because I figured, the boys will do those, so I just close the closet door.